So just to introduce ourselves, my name is Francois Verges. I'm the owner and managing director for SemFio Networks. So we do Wi-Fi professional services. We're also a Juniper partner. And so we've been doing Wi-Fi for a bit. And we've been, I wanted to say, playing with the Mist solution for a while also. So it's been a fun ride, and we've been enjoying it very much. Today with me I have Dan. Dan, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Francois. So Dan Snell, I'm one of the consulting engineers with Juniper Mist. Really focused on the Mist product line, so that's everything to do with Wi-Fi, as well as management of Juniper devices through the Mist AI portal.
Yeah, so Dan will, I'll be mainly presenting the content today, but Dan will be here to kind of, give additional details and answer some of my questions as well. Thank you for your time, Dan. Okay, so what I want to cover in this hour, first I want to talk about Wi-Fi DevOps. That's a term that we like to use at SemFio Networks, but I want to explain what it is, and also I want to explain why we're doing more and more automation and integration work using our Wi-Fi tools. So in the first section, I'll talk about this. Then we'll talk about the Juniper Mist advantage when it comes to Wi-Fi DevOps. We'll talk about different use cases on how we can implement this in the real world for your specific business cases. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the lessons I've learned working on some of these automation projects in this year. Actually, I worked on a couple of them. So I wanted to kind of share my experience and talk about what I've learned. And then at the end, hopefully that will be soon, we'll do a demo, and then I'll show you a couple of tools we can use to actually do some automation, and then we'll get into the dashboard so we can actually make things a little bit more practical. If you have any questions along the way, feel free to drop it in the chat. So first of all, I wanted to talk about what I call Wi-Fi. Yeah, tell me.
Not sharing screen yet.
Seriously?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Can you see it now?
Good. Thank you.
So you guys missed all of my slides. It's okay. Yeah. So oh, the chat is disabled for the participant. Okay. Sorry, Alex. You can use the Q&A then. We'll see that. I actually see the Q&A. Okay. So for the Wi-Fi DevOps. So what I call the Wi-Fi DevOps is all of the, I guess, automation and integration work that we're starting to do around Wi-Fi. So DevOps actually comes from the software development industry, and they came up with a methodology to kind of help, or to kind of bridge the gap between the dev team and the op team to create software that would help the operational teams be more efficient. And some of these new way of doing things are coming to Wi-Fi more and more, networking in general. And so we're starting to see more and more tools available to us to start doing automation and integration with our Wi-Fi infrastructures. So if we look at what Wi-Fi DevOps is it's pretty much a shift in the mindset of how we do things. So we're going to have new specific practices, a new way. We upgrade our controllers. We may not have controllers anymore. It might be in the cloud. Like with Mist, we have microservices. So you may have microservices that are upgrading or reloading in the backend, and you don't even know about it. It's not really impacting the service. So the way we can manage our infrastructure is evolving. We also have new tools available. That's what you see on the right here. So vendors like Juniper and Mist, they are providing new tools that comes with their solution. We have now APIs. We have the dashboards, cloud-based systems that are allowed to send us information via webhooks or WebSocket, for instance. And all of these new tools can make us rethink the way we deploy, the way we manage, and the way we support our Wi-Fi networks. So it kind of brings like a cultural change in the way we do things. So instead of thinking, SSH to log into my switch or my controller to write some commands, instead of thinking SNMP for monitoring, these new tools actually allows us to maybe think, about using the API to do the configurations, or using the webhooks to retrieve telemetry from the cloud and do the monitoring. So the new tools kind of forces us to rethink the way we do things, and that's really the cultural shift we're seeing, and I see that a lot. Sometimes I teach Wi-Fi. I actually teach some of the Juniper classes, and students will ask me, okay, can you save the configuration of the switch, or can you back up the configuration of the switches? And it's kind of like an old way of thinking, because now everything is in the cloud. So if you want a backup of the switch configuration, you could go back in the cloud, or you could leverage the cloud to actually send you the switch configurations on a regular basis, and then you can save it on your own database if you want to. So it's really a shift on how we do things, how we deploy the networks, how we monitor, and how we manage them. So the promise behind the Wi-Fi DevOps, when we talk about Wi-Fi DevOps, and when you see it in the marketing material, the promise behind it is that Wi-Fi DevOps will allow us to do network automation, so automate some of the operational tasks we're doing. On one end, that's one end of it. The other end is integration. So this would allow us to integrate the Wi-Fi infrastructure with other systems in the IT realm. Okay, so we'll talk more about these two categories when we talk about the use cases, because we can actually illustrate what that means for us in the real world. With all of this, we have new expectations, right? Because the management has new expectations. They hear about DevOps, automation, and all of this. So they come back to the engineering team or the network team, and they want us to start automating things, because we can do more in less time. We can also minimize the human error factor when we start automating properly. So the management team is kind of expecting us to do this. They're also expecting us to leverage the new tools to help the business engineer new solutions, so we can develop new applications, get some data out of the Wi-Fi infrastructure, and develop some new applications. So we have greater expectation from the management, because we have tools that allows us to do more. On the other hand, in the network industry, we can also see that right now some of the teams are getting smaller, or it's harder to find people. When someone leaves the team, it's harder to find qualified people. And on top of this, we have the new expectation and the new workload that's coming from the management. So the work is becoming a little bit more interesting. So as a Wi-Fi guy, we're kind of like in the middle of this. We have to take care of the operational, but then at the same time, we have to deploy the new equipment that supports the new automation protocol. So we have to start learning programming. We have to start implementing it. Then we may have the business asking to develop new use cases or applications on top of the Wi-Fi infrastructure. So we have to deliver that as well. So for sure, the pressure is increasing, but it makes the journey even more interesting. And I think personally, the way the Wi-Fi engineer job is evolving, I think it's going to be more and more a combination of networking skills and programming skills, if we want to be able to deliver what the business requires from us. Right. So when I talk about programming skills, I'm not talking about becoming a full programmer, but at least knowing the base understanding of what programming is, maybe knowing a couple of languages like Python and JSON, those type of things. API languages could be very useful to help us in our future projects. So now now that we understand kind of like where the trends are today in the industry, if we look at Juniper Mist, and if we look at the advantage that the solution has, it goes very well in hand with what we've just talked about. And the first thing that I want to talk about here is the API driven aspect of the solution. Mist is actually not a very old solution, and when they created the solution, they created it in the cloud based on microservices, and they had the API driven approach from day one. So everything that's being done in the cloud for Mist is done via the API, which makes a big difference when you start working with the API, because you don't have to ask yourself the question of, if one feature is supported versus another, or versus the controller or the dashboard. Every feature is supported in the Mist cloud. You're using the API. So when you start using the API, you can pretty much do anything you want with the system. Anything that's supported by the cloud, you can do it using the API. And that allows you to create dashboards. So we'll see it later on when we start the demo, but the actual Mist dashboard, the one that the manage.mist.com, it's actually using API in the backend to communicate with the Mist cloud. So whenever you do things on the dashboard, monitor, configure different things, it will just send those API calls back to the Mist cloud. But what you could do is, if you have a very specific need or requirements, you could actually create your own dashboard to do the same thing. You could create your own dashboard that fits your particular requirement and send your own API calls to the Mist cloud, and that would be totally fine. You could do this. You could also create like a slim dashboard if you only want to give like one set of features to one set of users, but you don't want to let them do anything else. You want a very simple dashboard. So you could totally do this as well with the APIs. What you could do as well with the API is start to do some scripting. So instead of having like a UI, like a dashboard where you click and you do things, you could actually program and automate some of these tasks that you would do through the dashboard. You can program them in a script, so you can start automating different things. And that becomes very useful if you have a lot of things to repeat, a lot of things to do, a lot of sites to deploy, a lot of API to configure, for instance. The scripting aspect becomes very useful. And the fact that Mist, the Juniper Mist solution, is API driven helps greatly, because it's easier to do. You don't have to, you still have to program, but you don't have to kind of reverse engineer the solution. And then what you could also do is build some more complex applications. So, if you want the Mist infrastructure to interact with another system that also has an API, then you could create an application that talks to both APIs, or maybe multiple APIs, 3, 4, 5 APIs of different systems, and create your own complex applications. And you could exchange data between the Wi-Fi infrastructure and other applications that you may have in your IT system. Dan, you want to add something?
I think you said that very, very well, Francois, so far.
Okay, thank you. The other advantage with Mist is the AI approach that they have. So, and that's exactly just as the API approach. They started from day one. They had this AI approach to the system. They built a system in the cloud to take advantage of these machine learnings and AI algorithms. And what that allows us to do today, after a few years of maturity, is actually get a lot of telemetry from the Mist cloud. So we could get telemetry directly from the equipment, as we are used to do with SNMP or the legacy way of monitoring the network. So we could do things like this with Mist. Mist even supports OpenConfig, if you guys know what OpenConfig is. But where the AI really shines is when you start looking at what they call the SLEs, and then when you start looking at what Marvis is giving us. So the SLEs, it stands for service level expectations, and it's some metrics that Mist is giving us to assess the user experience. So they have different categories. They're very useful when you start looking into them and understanding what they do. They become very useful, especially to troubleshoot what's going on the network. So we can actually retrieve these AI telemetry, these SLEs, on a regular basis, using different APIs. So we could totally build our own custom solutions to monitor these SLEs, or we could use the manage.mist.com dashboard to visualize the SLEs. And the SLEs there, just like how we talked about Wi-Fi DevOps and the shift in mindsets, the SLEs kind of goes along with the shift on mindset. So they don't just show us one specific metric. like poor SSI or high channel utilization, but they try to assess if some Wi-Fi metric could impact the user experience, and that's what it's trying to show us. So which is very useful for us, because we know that sometimes we may have like a bad metric on the Wi-Fi network, but it's not necessarily impacting the user experience. So we might not care about it as much as if we have something that's really have impact on the user experience. So that's what the SLEs are. We also have Marvis. So Marvis is the AI engine, or the virtual network assistant that sits in the cloud. And Marvis is also able to give us some information on how the network is doing. The system has something called the Marvis Actions, which is very useful if you have a large network, because it's pretty much the Marvis algorithm telling you what needs to be done on the network if you don't want to have problems, pretty much. So it's like the action that you should take right now in order to fix apparent issues. And you can also retrieve this information as well using some of the webhooks that we have available with Mist. So we can actually be alerted on it. We can send emails, SMS. We'll see. We'll talk about the integrations. We can even receive like Slack messages and stuff like this. So that's also one thing, one aspect on which I think Juniper Mist is really good, is all of the AI information it's giving us. So it kind of sorts all of the Wi-Fi logs for us, and then spits out in close to plain English what the problem is, so we can act upon it. And then we also have potential integrations. So because the API is very rich, we can also integrate Juniper Mist with other systems that has rich APIs. So I put a couple of examples here, more related to network operations. But you could integrate with ServiceNow, for instance. So if you're using ServiceNow for all of your ticketing, your incident management, and all of this, you could actually, example I usually give, if you have an AP that goes down, you could actually automatically create a ticket on ServiceNow using the integration and the APIs, and then document that ticket. And then if the AP comes back up because it was just like a power, issue for an hour or something like this, then you could actually detect that the AP is back up, and then you could close the ticket automatically. So you could document all of that network outage without any human, intervention. And you could still send alerts if you wanted to through ServiceNow, but you can kind of automate that communication between Mist and ServiceNow, which is nice. You could integrate with like instant messaging app like Slack and Microsoft Teams. So if people are using, these applications extensively in your companies, you could actually create dedicated channels. So when you make changes or when there's a problem, you get alerted on these channels, and you can act upon it, or whoever is responsible can act upon it. And then I put Splunk as an example, because Splunk, some companies use that to kind of keep data for a longer period of time. So you could actually, if you wanted to save extra information from your network infrastructure, if you wanted to create some graph and reports, you could do that with Mist. But if you're already using Splunk, you could use that as well. Do you have any other example, Dan, that you're thinking about?
Those are the ones that I've seen quite frequently used. And the context there is that even with Marvis and the conversational assistants that we have, it changes that operation perspective, or that help desk team, and how they can interact with the system without necessarily having to have a direct login into manage.mist.com.
Yeah, exactly. That's interesting. I actually know a company that uses Mist, but they don't use the manage.mist.com dashboard. So they created their own dashboard to interact with the system, which is very interesting. But the API allows you to do these type of things. Now, if we try to talk about some of the use cases on how we could leverage all of these tools to kind of automate and integrate different things in our infrastructures, I kind of categorize the use cases in two different categories or buckets. The first one, I called it the network operations. So we could actually use all of these tools to automate some of the tasks we do, some of the operational tasks that we do as part of the operation of the network. So if you're thinking about deployment, what you could totally do is, for instance, do a design in something like Ekahau, and then take that design and then run a script against it and automatically configure the Mist cloud. So you could pull out things like the map, the location of the APs, maybe you can a site name, maybe an address for Ekahau, maybe a couple of configurations for the SSIDs, and then you could use that data to talk to the Mist cloud through like a Python script, for instance, and automatically deploy the site, which could help you deploy sites faster. That's useful if you have a lot of sites that you have to design. Other example is for the deployment is the validation aspect of it, right? So after you're done installing the equipment, you can actually run a couple of scripts to validate that the APIs have been installed at the right location, validate that all the APIs have been installed. You could validate things related to power as well and port switch ports. So you can write your own validation check scripts as well. If you want to validate, for instance, that installers have done their job before they leave the site. So you could do things like this as well to can help us with the operational task. For the monitoring,
I want to jump in as well from the deployment side, is a lot of customers will have different environments. So it's not necessarily one single template. So you might have carpeted spaces, you might have retail environments, you could have warehousing environments, or even within different different customer bases, you might have different buildings for specific purposes or requirements. So with these deployments, it allows you to also help identify these different template designs that are going to be defined by type of building and how you actually want to roll out the configurations.
Yeah, and when it comes to the monitoring here, what you could do is you could create your own dashboard, and so if you have like a very specific requirement or a very specific metric you want to keep an eye on, you can actually create like your own dashboard using tools like Grafana, for instance, and then pull data from the Mist cloud and display that information in front of you. That could be very, very useful when you do the monitoring. You could also use it if you do troubleshooting. So let's say you're doing troubleshooting and you're looking at one very specific set of information over time, then you can also get that information out of the system in a pretty easy fashion. So that's other things we can do and automate as well. You can also rethink the way you manage your incidents. So going back to the integration with ServiceNow and Slack, you could actually think about how you could optimize the way incidents are being created and managed and troubleshoot. So you could think about that and try to see what you can automate on that front as well. So you could use all of these new tools to think about use cases where you can make your operational lives a little bit better. And this is especially useful if you have like a lot of sites, a lot of APs. It can really help out. Or if you're doing the same task over and over, if you find yourself every morning doing the same thing, or every week, every month doing the same task over and over again, maybe that's some things you can start thinking of automating. On the other hand, what we can also do is use all of these new tools to develop new business applications. So we can now actually, take the data out of the Wi-Fi infrastructure and then feed that data somewhere else to create a new business application, to create, to create a new way of doing things. So, we have a couple of examples here, but if you deploy Mist, also we didn't talk about it, but Mist also support they have a pretty good location, BLE location solution, and if you deploy it, you become aware of the location of your devices. So then you can use that data for different purposes. You can use that data to make sure you don't lose different products. different goods that are expensive. You can use that data to interact with the user. If you're thinking about, for instance, like a museum and you want to know, or you want to give the user different data based on which room they are in or which art piece they're looking at. So you can think about a whole bunch of use cases, applications that you could do once you know the location of the user. In the retail environment, you could also, provide different information based on where the user is, or you can even study how the people are, moving around the store to better rearrange the stock and make better use of the layout of the store. For I have a student dome here. For student dome, you could automate the creation of Wi-Fi password, or you can let the student create their own password, remove their password if they have a guest, create private networks, and you can kind of automate all of this to make everyone's life easier. So they don't contact the IT team for a new password, right? So you have a whole bunch of different applications that you could do here to kind of help the business. Sometimes these ideas would come from the business. Sometimes these ideas can also come from us, and then we can talk to the business and be like, why we have this data, what could we do with it? And it could be very, very beneficial, in different environments. Dan, I know you want to say something.
No, I like it, Francois. Thank you. I think at the end of the day, it allows you to have a different level of visibility, but also address different use cases that I think you said perfectly, that either the business is coming up with, or some of your own unique ideas, or asking Francois for some of his ideas as well.
Yeah. So one thing I would like to see more and more is in warehouses, I would like to see more integration between the devices and the warehouse management systems, because more and more devices are running Android. So what you could do nowadays is you can write an Android app that interact with the warehouse management system, but also interact with the Mist cloud. And so you could use the location of the device to do different things on the warehouse management system. Or you could use things like the virtual beacon a solution in the Mist cloud to enhance or create new applications. Where, for instance, the forklift operator will be able to, to drop, drop a virtual location somewhere about different things and reuse that location later. Or automatically, some location of the stock will automatically get updated on the warehouse management system based on the location of the device, things like this. So I think it would be pretty cool to see more of these integrations over time. Okay, looking at the time, not too bad. So here in this section, I kind of want to talk about some of my experience. I had the opportunity to work on a couple of automation projects this year, which I had a lot of fun working on them. It was really nice. And so I wanted to talk about a couple of things. The first thing I wanted to talk about here is what they call the wall of confusion, and that concept comes from the DevOps methodology. And the wall of confusion is pretty much the lack of integration, the lack of process, the lack of communication between the operation teams and the dev team. And when you need to create a program to help the operations, it's hard to have this wall of confusion if you want the process to be efficient. So the DevOps methodology is there to kind of bring that wall down and allow efficient communication between the two group of peoples. And this year, when I worked on these Wi-Fi automation projects, I actually, found myself between the Wi-Fi team, which was taking care of the Wi-Fi operations, and they also had like a dev team. So some developers that got assigned to the project to help us actually write the code. And so on one hand, we had the dev team that was really good at programming, but didn't know anything about Wi-Fi. They didn't know the tools, they didn't know the vocab, they didn't know the metrics and all of this. And on the other side, you had the operational teams that was very good at Wi-Fi, but they didn't know programming. So because I kind of knew both I guess, more about Wi-Fi, but a little bit about programming. I was kind of able to kind of act as a bridge between the two teams and kind of help them achieve what they were looking at doing. But if we look at the bringing this world down in the real world, we pretty much have two solutions. It's either the Wi-Fi engineer learning more about programming, or the programmer learning more or learning Wi-Fi. So in my opinion, I think it's easier for the Wi-Fi engineer to learn a little bit about programming enough to start doing things, rather than trying to have the programmers learn Wi-Fi. So that's my personal opinion. So that's why we've been doing more and more automation work and programming work, because we can now position ourselves as kind of a bridge between the two teams and help them achieve their project and automate their task. So a couple of things I worked on this year was automating some of the design process, automating replacement of APIs, automating generation of documentations, AP maps and stuff like this when you have a lot of APs. So that's the type of project I've worked on, and I was kind of like in between the two teams, to kind of try to break that wall, pretty much. So the thing that helped me a lot was the understanding of Wi-Fi operations, because when you have some field experience, when you know how Wi-Fi works, when you know what to do, when you know the implication of your actions, rebooting a controller and stuff like this, you kind of know what you can automate and what you cannot automate. That really helps you in the process when you know how to use the tools. Some of the dev that I worked with, they had no clue of what EKH was, or what design was. So it makes the automation process way harder when you have to kind of explain everything from scratch. So I think we have a very good advantage here as knowing the Wi-Fi operations. So it kind of helps us to better understand what can be done through the automation. Through the automation. Do you guys have any questions? Are you still listening to me?
I'm not seeing anything posted yet in the Q&A section yet, Francois. Okay. But I'll continue to monitor.
Awesome.
But awesome. Guys, as you have questions, by all means, happy to help you.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Staying is listening. That's good. Okay, so to finish the hour, we'll talk about some of the tools, and we'll demo a few things. And here I wanted to show you 3 tools that we could use to kind of study and understand the automation and do some of the automation as well. The first one is your browser. So we'll look at the browser and we'll look at what's going on behind the scene when we actually use the Mist dashboard. Then we'll take a look at Postman, which is a tool. It's called the API platform tool, and it's a tool we can use to actually make some API calls, study some API calls, start to do some automation without necessarily having to code per se. It's one of those no-code tools. And then to finish it off, oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. To finish it off, we'll take a look at Python. So I have a couple of scripts that I prepared that I can show you to kind of see what we can do as well with Python. So we'll go through the different tools and we'll take a look at how we can do some of it. And to start it off, we'll take a look at the browser. So I'm going to go to my browser here, manage.mist.com, and I'm going to go to this org, which is the main org that I use for the business. I think most of you guys are familiar with the dashboard. But if I go to the organization and I look at the settings, I have my org here, and if I look at the sites, we have a few sites. If I go to the AP, the SemFio lab here, it's my house pretty much. So this is a few APs I have available here. So like I said earlier, when you use the Mist dashboard, this website, it's actually making API calls in the backend. So everything you do here is, I don't want to say everything, but almost everything you do through the dashboard is using the Mist API in the backend. And you can actually visualize this in your browser. So most browsers nowadays, they have an option. It's usually called the developer view or the developer tool. You have that in Chrome, Safari, Firefox. And here I'm using Brave, which is a Chrome-based OS. And I can go to View Developer Tool. And when you bring the developer tool up, you'll see that you have a network tab. And when you refresh a page, you will see all of the network calls that are happening behind the scene as your page is being loaded. So here, if I want to display my access points, and I can also add a filter here. So I can filter the actual URL that is used to communicate with the Mist API. So api.mist.com, sorry. So if I refresh here, you'll start to see that some requests, actually it's quite a bit, a few requests are being sent to the Mist API. And I could click on them and kind of see what's going on. So the first one here, it's just retrieving my authentication information just to make sure that I'm actually logged in and authorized to access the information. But if I look at some of these requests and I go down, I want to look for the one that's called devices here. And this one is the options. I want the request, this guy here. And if I look at this device request, I can see that we have a very specific URL that was requested, and we can see that it was a HTTP GET request. So we're asking the Mist Cloud to send us some information. And if we want to see the results, we can actually go to the preview tab here, and we can see that we got actually 4 different results that corresponds to the 4 APs that I have here assigned to my lab. So if I open one of them, you can see that I have all of the information about this specific AP, the SemFio AP02, and this is all of the information that I'm getting from the API, and this is what the dashboard is using to kind of display all of the information you see in this table, right? So it's using what we call the RESTful API, which is HTTPS based, to make this call and retrieve the information from the cloud. So that's pretty cool. You can see a few requests are made. If you make a change, so if I take an AP here, AP05, and I change the name to 55, let's say, let me clear the list here and then save it here. So as I save it, you'll see that the first request that was made, it's not a get anymore, it's a put. And you use a put when you want to modify an object that's already existing. In this case, we're modifying the AP that we have. And if I want to see what has been modified, I can look at the payload, and you can see that we are modifying the name to be AP55. And if I look at the response, I could check in this list to see if the name is updated. So I don't have the perfect layout, but if I were to search here in this name, you can see the name here has been updated to 55. So that's the cloud telling me that, everything worked well. We've updated the name to 55. So you can see that here the API is used to retrieve information, but it's also used to modify information, create elements, or delete elements if I wanted to. I'm not going to delete the API I'm connected to right now. That would be a bad idea. Just setting back the name to 05. So that's pretty nice, but you're probably going to ask me, okay, it's good, but how do you know which API call to make? How do you know the syntax of all of these different URL? How do you know to use device when you want to get information about access points? So in order to get all of that information, you have to go to the API documentation. And you can actually access the API documentation if you're logged in onto your dashboard, and you click on the top right-hand corner here, and you click on Mist API documentation. It will bring you to this page where you can see the documentation about the API. And I could go under site, device, for instance, and here they will tell me what type of information I'll retrieve from my device. They'll tell me which URL I need to use, and so on. So this is like the official documentation. They also have another link another documentation here on Postman.
I can't airdrop it like it's hot.
Okay. It's my watch acting up. But so here on this website, it's the same information, but it's organized in a different layout. And so this one is a little nicer to look at, so I can go and navigate through my sites and my devices. And here, what I like about this is you actually have like an example of if you were to copy it into some Python, you have some example here that you can look at. And if you look at the the requests. Yeah, if you look at the post, for instance, they'll give you an example of what type of information you need to communicate to the Mist Cloud in order for the Mist Cloud to be happy. So this is very useful. You can have all of the information here in front of you. Okay, and this is documented because what actually happened, and I'm going to transition to Postman. Here. So Postman, it looks quite overwhelming like this when you've never used the tool, but it's actually a free application you can install on your machine. You can also log in on the website and start using it. But Postman it's a tool that allows you to send some API calls. So you can really tune which URL you want to use. You can tune the authentication that you want to use, the parameter that you want to send. So you can really use that tool to test some API calls. And you can also use that tool to study what the system is sending you back. So what the Mist Cloud is sending you back. So once you know what the Mist Cloud is sending you back, which type of information, you can retrieve that information and do things with it. So it's very useful to do this, to study the API calls. And what you can also do with Postman is create multiple requests and connect them together if you want to start doing some automation work. This is what they call the runner collections. So you could actually have the system execute multiple requests one after the other if you wanted to automate a specific task without having to necessarily code a lot of Python, right? So the way you use Postman is first of all, we're going to need a couple of things from the Mist API. We're going to need a token. The token will authorize us to actually send the request and get some answers from the Mist Cloud. And we also need the org ID, the organization ID, if we want to start talking to a specific org or asking questions about a specific org. So that's information that I have already retrieved and placed into my Postman, but I'll show you how you can get these informations for yourself. If you want the token, so I'm going to go back to the dashboard. If I want a token for my user, I can go back to the dashboard and then click on the API documentation. And then on the left here, you'll see a section called API token. And then it will give you the URL. And you can see it starts with /API/v1/self/token. So what I usually do is modify the URL of the documentation page, remove the docs, and replace it by self/API token. So if you already logged into your dashboard, it will use your own credentials to go to this page, and you will see all of your current tokens, right? You cannot see mine because obviously, so when you create a token, you can only see it when you create it. After it's created, you don't see them anymore. You just see, that it exists. Don't ask me why I have so many tokens. But if you go to the bottom of the page, you have a post button. So I'm not going to click on this because you're going to see my token. But if you click on post, then you'll get a new key that will be available for you, and it will be very long. And you can copy this. That will become your token that you can place into Postman. And you should treat your token as a password as well, right? It's a very private information. So you should treat it as a password. Use password management to store them and stuff like this. Now for the org ID, if I want to get the org ID for my org, I can go back to the Mist dashboard, go to the organization, go to the settings, and here I have the org ID that I can copy. And this is my org ID. right? So now if I go back to Postman, what I can do is here I can actually create a new collection. A collection is a set of requests. So I could create a new collection. I'll call it webinar. And then what I can do is I can join my token here. So I could say, you know what, to interact with this API, I'm going to need some, I forgot which one it is. It's API key. And then the key for Mist is authorization with the proper spelling. And then here, this is where you would put your API token. But before the API token, you have to use a token keyword. So you put the token keyword, and then you put your API token here. You can paste it here. What I've done on my end is I've created a variable that I've called API token that I can use here instead of using my token. Right? And then now that I have this will be applied to the entire set of requests that I'm giving. I'm going to apply to or save under this specific webinar collection. Okay. Now, how can I create my request? Well, there's something that's really nice with Mist is that a couple of the Mist engineers created what we call the Mist Postman collection. So they took all of the calls that are defined in the documentation, and they've converted them into requests that we can use in Postman. So if you go to this link, maybe I'll send it to you guys after the call. You can click on for a collection, and this will open your Postman. And in your Postman, you'll see, if you wait a little bit, you'll get this Mist Cloud API. You can see here that this is the one that I have forked. And if I look into this Mist Cloud API, you can see that I have the exact same sections that you have in the API documentation. And I can go and see, if I go to my org, and if I want to get, for instance, the list of my sites, I could go to sites and find the get org sites request. So here I don't have to think too much about, about the syntax, the variable required, and all of this. I can just go to this request and start using it. In our case, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to save it under the webinar collection that we just created. And then I'll go back to the webinar set here. And so for the host here, I've configured an api.mist.com host in my environment. That's something I haven't showed you, but you can create environments in the Postman, application. And then I could specify my org ID here. So I could specify my org ID. It will replace the org ID in the URL for me, and then I can just send it, and it will tell me, what information I'm getting. So here I'm getting authentication credentials were not provided. It's because I need to save the authorization here. Okay. And if I go back here and I send it, so here it sent a request to this is actually my lab against my lab. And now it's retrieving all of the sites that I have in my lab. Right now, I only have one. So you can see, I can see my primary site. But if I change my environment and I ask to send a request against my org, and I send it, here you can see that I actually have multiple sites in here. And this corresponds to the different sites that I have here under my site configure, all of these guys here. Okay. So if you look at this, we can actually reuse all of these commands to do a whole bunch of stuff, right? So what I want to try to do here with you guys is, and I have my backup here that I have created just in case we actually run out of time. But so I'll show you my backup here. So here, what I want to do is I want to create a site. Then I want to create a configuration template. I want to create a WLAN profile, an SSID that we would assign to that org template. And then I want to assign an AP. So I have an AP with me here. You can see it, yeah, right here. not plugged in. Okay, Murphy, I guess. We'll see how we can deal with that. So the goal would be to assign the AP and then connect to that AP, and then see if we can see my clients connecting to that AP. So the goal would be to do all of this without using the dashboard, just using Postman to make the API calls. I'm actually going to use another cable here just to see if my AP. Okay. Okay, so the first request here, what we're doing is we are just getting the sites. So if I do it against my lab, and if I show you my lab right now, you'll see that in my lab, there's nothing. If I go to site configuration, refresh, I don't have much in the lab. I just have a site. If I go and look at the configuration templates, there's nothing. There's nothing for now. So if I go back to Postman, and if I send a request to the cloud asking me to list all of the sites, I can only see my primary site, which is good. Now, if I want to create a site, I'm going to use these post requests. And when you send a post request, you'll see that the URL is the exact same one as the one previously. So it's going to just use the /sites URL. But when you use a post request, you're actually asking the cloud to create one site for you. So because you're asking the cloud to create a site, you have to provide information about that site. So in the body here, you'll see that we will provide the minimum set of information required for Mist to create a site. So a name, a timeline, country code, latitude, longitude, and address. So if I click on send here, it's going to send that request. And it was pretty fast here. And it's going to create the site. And you can see that as a response, I get a whole bunch of information about that site. And the information that will be important for me is the ID. So I'm going to copy this ID, and this ID will uniquely identify this first site that I've created. If I go back to my dashboard and I refresh, I should get the new site. Now, Webinar HQ. And then you can see it has its proper address and everything. So that's working so far. Now, the next step I want to do is create a WLAN template. So here, same thing. It's going to be a post because I'm creating a new template. The URL has changed a little bit. Now I'm using the /template URL. And same thing, I'm going to provide information to the Mist cloud in terms of how I want to configure that template. And what I'm telling the cloud here is just a name that I want to use for that template. And I'm also giving the ID of the site that I want to apply this template to. So I've just copied the ID from the new site I've created. So I'm pasting it here. So when I send it, the cloud knows which site I want to apply to this template. So what I've done here with this call is I've created that WLAN profile and I've assigned it to the site I've just created. So if I go back to Mist and I go to the WLAN template, you can see that now I have a new one, and you can see that it is applied to the Webinar HQ site. It doesn't have any SSIDs yet, but it's been applied. Now, if I want to create an SSID, I can send another post request. This time, it's going to be a /WLANs. And same thing, I'm going to have to specify what the SSID, which frequency band, and what will make it 6 gig compatible. Why not? Even though I don't have a 6 gig AP. But we'll make it WPA3. We have a password and everything. And the one thing we have also here is the template ID. So we can actually link and assign this SSID to the WLAN template if we just provide the proper ID for the template. So I need to actually go back to my template and retrieve the ID that the Mist Cloud sent me. And then I can reuse that in here to apply that SSID to the right template. And you can see we had a positive answer here. So if I go back to the dashboard and I go into the template, now you can see that we have that SSID, 6 gigahertz SSID configure. So far, so good. So next step would be the AP. So let's see in my inventory, I have an AP here. Okay, so we'll see if that works. We have an AP, and the last call I have is this one is called inventory. And what I'm doing is I'm assigning this specific MAC address, which is my AP, to this specific site. And the site I have to go and change. Once again, I have to go and retrieve the ID of my site that I've just created. And I have to update it here so it assigns it to the proper one. And here you can see that the assign has been successful, and it's telling me that the AP has been assigned to the site. So if I go back to my dashboard and I go to my HQ site, I should see my AP, which is disconnected. Okay, so my AP is disconnected somehow. I don't know why. And I tried 2 different cables. But if my AP was connected to the network, it will start broadcasting that SSID that we've configured, and then I'll be able to connect to it, which is pretty nice. And the last step I had was, list the clients that are connecting to a specific site. In this case, I mean, I can do it, but I'm not going to have any clients since I don't have any AP. But I would have been able to see my clients starting pop up here as I have my clients connecting. So this is just an example to show you that we can actually recreate everything we do in the dashboard. We can recreate it using Postman, and we can use Postman to actually study the different API calls that are happening behind the scene. And how did I know, which API to use? Well, I just look at the browser, and you can reverse engineer what the dashboard is doing, and it will tell you what to do pretty much. So that's one thing you can do. And this is especially useful if you're not too familiar with like Python and programming and things like this. You can actually get some of this automation work done using Postman and create your own collections and all of this.
Yeah, I think this goes back to Francois' earlier point about, is it easier for a DevOps person to go and learn Wi-Fi or a Wi-Fi engineer to go and learn DevOps and programming? And the context for me, at least from this perspective, is almost a crawl, walk, run philosophy. So it lets you take those baby steps first before having to go out and full-fledged Python scripting.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And this, you can take, like Postman is way more powerful than this. You can take this one step further, and you can actually, all the copy pasting I was doing from IDs to parameters, you can actually program it using JavaScript. So you could actually, if I went one step further, I could have just programming all of this and click on one button, and it would have just done all of the requests one after the other. And that's what they call the runner. They also have something called the flow, where you can connect your different requests as a flow. So I'll invite you guys to take a look at this. And we're out of time, but I still have the Python piece to show you. So because I don't have much time, I'm just gonna show you a demo of what I had. And for the Python piece, I had a couple of scripts that I saved here. But the first one is a script that can automate the deployment of multiple sites. But before that, I have to clean my organization. So I actually have this script here that I've created that deletes everything that's part of an organization. So when I go back to my lab organization here, it just goes back to an empty shell. I have no sites, nothing. I've just deleted everything part of that organization. So that's one thing I've learned as you start, testing things. At one point, you want to clean your organizations. That's why I have this here script, and maybe we can talk more about that one day. But that was a good learning curve. Now, the script that I had here, what I did is I started from a CSV file in which I have information about different sites. And here, the site that I have is pretty much all of the NHL arenas in Canada. So you have the one that we know. And the information that I'm feeding the system is the name of the site group, how I want to categorize them, the address, and then the RF template I want to use. And based on that information, the script is just going to deploy everything for me, and it's going to configure a couple of SSIDs and apply them to all of the sites. So if I run the script, I'm just gonna so you'll see it will kind of deploy the different sites. So here it's creating the sites. It's also using the address. It's using the Google API to go and retrieve the longitude, latitude, because Mist needs that information. And then it's creating a WLAN template that I called Arena. And then it's deploying a couple of SSIDs, staff, fan. And that's it. It just deployed everything. If I had the APs, I could, that's one step I didn't do is assign the APs, but I could have assigned the APs to the different sites if I had the list of APs and site, MAC address and sites. And so now if I go back to my lab, you'll see that all the sites are created. You can see they have the proper template, the proper site group, the proper address. And then you can also see that the WLAN template is created with a couple of SSIDs in here. So this is, I guess, a little script here that would be useful if you have a lot of sites, similar sites, or like Dan said, if the sites are different, you could create different templates. You could configure what I didn't show you here is I have a configuration file in which I provide details about the WLAN configurations and the site groups. So you could actually create different site groups, assign different WLANs to different site groups, and be a bit more flexible on how you create all of this. Does that make sense? Are you guys still here? Do we still have everyone?
We're still here. I think that's awesome.
Okay. So since we still have everyone, I have a couple more to show you. These ones are more for monitoring, and it's very small and easy scripts. This one show the stats of the Ethernet connection of APs. So it's just going to retrieve all of the APs and give me the stats of the Ethernet connections to see if I have any errors, the data put through them. And the idea behind this script is I needed to monitor the speed of the connection. And so this actually sorts them according to the lowest speed. So the APs with the lowest speed will show up at the top, and I'll be able to see which APs are connected with 100 meg or 10 meg maybe. I don't know. You guys still use 10 meg, but so we'll be able to see, the APs with the lowest speeds using, that was the main objective of this tool. Also created this monitor channel utilization tool here, which will go through all of the APs that I have in my org and retrieve the channel utilization for both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz and just display the information for me. It sorts it according to the 5 gigahertz channel utilization. And you can get this information in the dashboard, but it's if you want all of the APs on the same place, I just do it that way. It's just faster, and I can get the information for all the APs in the org. So that's a couple of other examples that you can use more for the monitoring aspect of things. And I also have the Slack integration configured. So we've been modifying stuff on the organization. So if I go back to Slack, and I should have Slack somewhere. Yeah, go back to Slack, you can see that I have a channel here called Mist Monitoring Info. And this one will give me information whenever a user is configuring something. And so here I can see that a user has changed the name of an AP to AP55. Interesting. I wonder who that is. So you can get the audit logs that way. I also have a couple of other channels for alerting or monitoring when an AP goes down and stuff like this. So this is a couple of things you can do. That's it. I'm going to stop talking. Thank you for your time. I want to respect your time. Thank you very much for attending. I did have a closing site here because we actually started a new website called Wi-Fi DevOps.com, and we're going to use this website to deliver some of the automation work we do for our customers. So that's what we're using alongside our automation services pretty much. And this is a sneak peek of what it looks like in the back end. So yeah, take a look at it. If you're interested, get in touch with us. I'll post the recording. And if you want to see more demo, or if you want to spend more time drilling down into some of the stuff we talked about, don't hesitate to reach out to me or Dan, and we'll take some time to do that.
I did see one question here in the chat, Francois,
Okay.
About, hey, can we use Slack to run those Python scripts?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily sure if I want to do that through Slack or if I'd want to do that through like ServiceNow instead. I'd probably want something that says, hey, I want to validate that this change request should be allowed versus having someone have access in Slack into that channel and trying to post. I don't know if you have a different context on that, Francois, or not.
Well, what you could do is not necessarily to the to make changes on the infrastructure, but if you wanted to have a couple of scripts to retrieve information, like just do some gets, you could have a couple of scripts that get information or information from Marvis, for instance, and send that information to the Slack. That could be useful if you're always looking at the same thing, or if you want to, if you're just on your phone and you're out and your boss is calling you and telling you Wi-Fi sucks, and you want to quickly ask Marvis. So that could be a way to doing it, to do gets. But yeah, I'm with you. If you're about to do changes, I think it needs to be a little bit more controlled. Maybe ServiceNow is more appropriate for that. Technically it's possible. If that the question was, if it's technically possible, yes, it is. Is it a good idea? I'm not sure.
Available for sure.
All right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Dan. Well, I guess we'll stay in touch.
My pleasure. And again, thanks everyone as well for joining and all the work you've done into this, Francois. So much appreciated.
No worries. All the pleasure is mine.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.